she confirmed up with now.
Okay, members, thank you, and I welcome you all to this morning's meeting of the Committee for Communities. We do have a quorum, and I call the meeting now to order. And to Fáilte Rómha Lig, you're all very welcome to the meeting. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery there for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. And please also use tablets discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones throughout the duration of the meeting. And finally, I'd remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Any issues, members? All content? Okay, thank you, members. So, any apologies, Clerk?
None.
None members aware of any apologies? No, thank you. Members, so just a couple of items of Chair's business. Ahead of our session next week with the Permanent Secretary and senior officials, you have been provided there with a memo from the Clerk at page 6. You've also been provided with a copy of a committee letter to the Department on this issue at page 10 and the departmental reply at page 19. The purpose of the memo from the Clerk is to seek committee agreement on the range of topics to be raised with officials. A list is set out in paragraphs 5 to 12, and members are asked to confirm if there are any further topics or queries which should be added to that list, which will then be given to the Department to assist with their preparations. I think that flow of information will in itself hopefully aid that process, and it's an important piece of work that we're trying to ensure the flow of information. So, members, any further issues at this point that anyone wants to add?
I'm just thinking, following today's presentation with Northern Ireland Water and how many housing that they're saying that they won't be able to do, there's part of our papers talks about the budget. Kiva's talking about giving or trying to get 100 million for Gordon for house building, but that's not going to happen by the figures that are coming from Northern Ireland Water. So we might have something there we need to speak to him, but housing's already on the list anyway. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kelly.
Just on number 6 is just, but I think it'll be covered the week after. Just arts policy wasn't mentioned, and following meetings with the sector last week from officials, there'll apparently be a new arts policy coming forward for consultation before the summer, so it'll be good to get sight of that as well. But I think that'll probably be covered by the creative briefing the week after, 2 weeks after. Yep.
Thank you, Brian.
And I don't think it would come up. Maybe support for those groups receiving the shared prosperity funding, because I think the one had around 40% reduction in their letters of offer. So just what engagement's happening. Some of those used to get ESF funding, and there was a departmental contribution at that stage from different departments. So just obviously they're down to around 2 months now, before they'll have to be letting staff go.
Okay. Well, Lisa?
And just can I request a link for our meeting next week, as I won't be able to attend in person.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, members, thank you for that. Then I also want to highlight the informal session we had with officials on Tuesday on the specific topic of universal credit, which was very well attended, and which I'm sure I think other members found very informative and really very useful and worthwhile. Following the offer by officials for more of this type of information session, might it be useful that we identify a list of topics or issues which an information Q&A session would be useful on? So happy to take topics today, or if members want to feed topics in to the clerk over time. But I thought it was a very, very useful way to get additional time and under the bonnet of some of those issues. So it was helpful. So any issues that occur to members right now, and if not, then members can forward issues on for further consideration by committee and agreement by committee. But Kelly?
It comes up in our correspondence. I was going to ask actually at that stage if we could get an update from Department for Communities on what actions they're taking under the executive programme on paramilitarism and organised crime. There does seem to be quite a lot of good work happening, but it's not spelt out in detail in the report that they've provided. It might be good at some stage just to get an awareness of the breadth of what they're involved with. Yeah.
And are you I'm thinking that that's probably a more formal committee session potentially. I'm really trying to drill into ones where there's a benefit in doing an informal session around information, and rather than maybe direct scrutiny, but and as an aid to scrutiny. So I'm not saying it's not in that category, but I sort of think maybe that's, so our members clear. So that session that we done on universal credit was dedicated to the detail of it, in terms of members' understanding of the issues, and officials were able to pick up on significant input from members as well. So just to differentiate, there still will be a need for committee scrutiny on a range of issues as well, but there may be some specific topics where that other type of session also feeds in information.
I think whilst we're focusing on the payment aspect of universal credit, I think it would be useful for a more, I suppose, looking at the breakdown of the different elements of universal credit, because I think that for us that would be something really useful. I think the way that Jacqueline described it is that nearly like your mobile phone tariff and your bolt-ons. It's the bolt-ons, I think, that cause the most confusion, and that would be really, really good. Or all elements of universal credit. That was really, really useful in terms of an overview. But universal credit is definitely the one thing that causes the most confusion in our constituency offices, and for my office anyway, is the most people coming in and seeking help. So.
And there might indeed be merit at a future time in doing another session on you. Like I think there was a sense that there's so many issues there. There could be indeed another session that would be, and it was I think welcome that the proactivity of the officials in the department to offer that was something of benefit.
And I think the rural aspect, in terms of like that, I could have talked for to Paddy, Rooney and Jacqueline for hours in terms of that, particularly around the farmer and the that kind of the fluctuation of income. Could be a session completely on its own, but it was really, really helpful.
Okay, so if members just continue to keep that in mind and keep that as a potential way to address some of those issues, that would be great. Moving on to draft minutes, members, then I refer you to the draft minutes from the meeting on 16th of January, and those are contained at page 23 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 16th of January as drafted? Thank you. Agenda item 4, matters arising then. So, members, you've been provided with a summary table, same as last week, for matters arising at page 38. I'll go through those replies in groups and ask if you wish to highlight anything from those responses. I would ask you to highlight issues you want to discuss using that numerical reference like we did last week, and I think worked well, and we'll go through them in chunks related to that identification. So there are items then, members, from 4.2 to 4.5. Are there any items within those items that you wish to discuss further? So Kelly, I think first, and then Sian.
It's the 4.4 from NIFA, the loss of funds to homeless organisations regarding the change of tenancy. When we were up in Derry at the meeting, our committee meeting, we heard there of the impact when somebody thankfully gets a permanent home and is coming out of temporary accommodation. The temporary accommodation being operated by those homeless organisations are carrying the cost burden of that transfer period, which is different to the housing executive, where there is no, if somebody's coming out of a housing executive temporary accommodation, that's covered before the person moves in. So it's just to clarify why is there a different arrangement there, and if we could get a detail of the legislation that prevents the rollover for those homeless organisations, because it's costing a lot of money. Yeah. Yep.
Are you content with the detail?
Yeah, why is there a different arrangement there and a copy of the legislation setting out the requirements?
It's why they're different from the housing executive. It's just that, given the fact that they're moving into permanent accommodation and it might take time to shift over, why is the rent not allowed to be paid in the temporary because it's a housing association or a homeless organisation providing that accommodation?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Sian, please.
Yeah, it's just 4.5 Gambling Commission. I think this just highlights, I suppose, why Northern Ireland is such a grey area, with no regulatory function really with that Gambling Commission. I'm just disappointed that they didn't offer even to, I suppose, to meet with us to kind of to go through some of the issues around the online gambling, which I don't think are in any way kind of set or around geographical boundaries. And potentially, is there where can we get more information? I suppose if they're saying that they can't brief us on this, then who can? For me, this is it's a really big issue. We've highlighted this before, and we heard it from the APG. So maybe that's one of those information sessions. Even looking at the previous gambling legislation. Obviously the Minister has outlined that it would be a huge piece, in fact one of the biggest pieces of legislation to go through the Northern Ireland Assembly. So would it be worth us understanding even exactly where the loopholes are, where the grey areas are, where we're not covered right now? Because I think that would give us a wee bit of a clearer idea then of maybe what is to be prepared for the next mandate, if possible.
Yeah, and I think we have sought a couple of different pieces of information, including Raise. I think we have a request to Raise, have we, on the gambling issue?
We've received all of the Raise papers up from gambling now.
And my other concern, I share your concern, Sean, and actually the concern really is that we have had an indication that there is no preparatory work. We understand, and I do understand the scope of the bill that will be required is probably challenging for this mandate. But I think that's all the more important why we need to, within this mandate, be preparing so we're ready to hit the ground running on the next mandate with that issue, because it is a public health issue.
If we were to do a mini inquiry or something along those lines as a committee, would that stand into the next mandate? You know,
It would, yeah.
I'm just thinking, would that be something that we could do as a committee? That would. I know that our time is of the essence, but I'm just wondering, would any work that we could do as a committee to smooth that way for the next mandate, would that be useful?
So funny, the exact same thought went through my head, and I'm very conscious that we will be facing into significant legislation, but maybe if we ask the clerk to take a look at maybe what the options around that might be and what the implications of that might be, I think it's worth looking at. That exact same thought was, I have to say, going through my head at the same time it was yours. So maybe we'll take a look at the options and come back. So if Kelly and then going to Brian.
Just very quickly to add on to 4.5, I have a massive concern about how the regulations are actually being monitored and carried out in the community. For instance, recently I got in contact with one of the local councils that are in my area to say that there was a gaming machine in a place where it's not supposed to be. The council came back and said, "You're right, it's not licensed. Can you call the police?" I thought the council was actually responsible for that. So the regulation within community is very unclear, and I think that that's one of the things that we actually need to know is who is policing this. You know, is it PSNI or is it our councils who are licensing agents for this? So there's a lot of grey area there.
And we have asked a lot of questions as of last week, which was a very useful session, and we have a lot of questions, we have a lot of threads there. The clerk will come back to us with a proposal maybe. But I think yeah, we absolutely need to keep an eye on it, absolutely. And more than an eye, we need to proactively assist the department in that role, and the department needs to be very conscious of the need to get as much done as we can to get this covered as quickly as we can, because of the challenges, not in spite of. Brian?
Just on the same topic, I mean, I did think the paper from the APG on reducing harm from gambling last week was very helpful, and they have a motion at the Assembly on Tuesday, I think it is, next week. So I think there'll be an interesting debate, and it'll be interesting to hear the Minister's response as well, assuming he will be responding. And certainly, even though he has said and officials have said the legislation would not be possible within this mandate, I still think we are right to keep pushing for what can be done, and what further information, more clarification, and as Kelly has said, you know, confusion with the role of the council, the police, the department, who's overseeing. And in a way, this reply from the Gambling Commission demonstrates that they're saying they have no jurisdiction, which we knew. But even regarding online gambling, which obviously is as the APG have said, leaves Northern Ireland like the Wild West, where there is no oversight for this. So I think we should continue to push this matter for progress still to be made, even if the major legislation is not going to be possible in this mandate.
Thank you. Okay, members. So anything else within 4.2 to 4.5? If not, then I'll move to 4.6 to 4.8. Are there any? And that's inclusive. So, Melissa, Lana
4.6, the increase in the national insurance costs, and particularly say to the voluntary and community sector. That they allude to the fact that it might in some way be compensated by this employer's allowance, and really we need some clarity on that and to what way it is that the people from the community and voluntary sector could avail of that.
You, Tom?
Clarity from the department, or who are we asking?
From the department, yeah.
Of how employers access it.
I'm thinking in particular, as I say, from the community and voluntary sector, and I'm not that sure whether or not that clarity is out there at the present time, or if they're aware of that, you know. But
Okay.
Kelly, and then come to Ciara.
It's just on the same point of that, I absolutely agree. I'd actually asked Mark at Homeless Connect how many of the members of Homeless Connect would actually be able to do this, and he wasn't too sure, and had to go away and ask them. Now, I know an accountant will probably be able to work all this out, but it would be interesting to know. I know NICFA has done quite a bit of work on identifying, the impact and the cost it will be. Maybe we could ask NICFA, as part of the work that they were doing, can they clarify how many of the community and voluntary sector members that they have will benefit from the HMRC employers allowance increases? Because I know it says from 5k to 10.5k, but what does that mean? What does that look like, for payroll?
Could we ask NICFA for how many of their membership?
Might have that
Okay.
information. If they don't, I don't know, they could maybe ask.
Ciara?
I just think it is worth noting in relation to obviously the British government. It's a British government policy that will impact really, really heavily on a huge number of sectors, and in particular, as you mentioned, the C&V sector. And I believe it's the British government also have a responsibility to be engaging quite closely and constructively with our finance minister to negotiate a settlement on the issue. I would also call, and I do welcome that the finance minister is currently undergoing, the team in the department, a cost of doing business survey, and it was mentioned in further correspondence there on page 58, which will be inclusive of the voluntary community sector. So I think if we could write to the Department of Finance and press that we are concerned as well, and we would be keen to receive a copy of the report as soon as it becomes available.
So, in terms then, members of 4.7, the impact of staff vacancies, I think that's pretty stark when you look at the impacts. Unable to maintain parity in several areas, include keeping pace in delivering the move to universal credit. Unable to provide equitable frequent work coach support. Only providing 21% of the support the frontline service should be providing to claimants. Lack of capacity to maintain and protect access to. So, and I do welcome, and I acknowledge and welcome in relation to what the department are doing, exit interviews and targets and all of that, and there is a sense of things being done. However, I think there actually would be a need to see what the plan is to deal and reverse those measures, rather than reporting on them. And I do think part of what is happening with the retention is part of that. But I get a sense of a lack of an overall plan and a very focused and urgent plan around the skills or whatever would be needed. So I'm wondering, as a piece there, we should write and ask the department what the plan is to address and reverse those impacts. That's the first thing, and then it's on this, so I'll go to Sian.
Yep. I totally agree. It is really stark, and I think we knew there were issues with vacancies, but when you actually read then that only providing 21% of the support to frontline service, and the unable to keep parity, and the, for me as well, the delay in making new claim payments in some instances, particularly when you're looking at this as children and people with disabilities, often those who are most needs. So yeah, there's definitely really stark reading in that, and I think none of us here in the committee were unaware that there were issues. So I do think to know exactly what's being put in place now to kind of, because this will only start, the pressures will only rise as we're having more moving over to UC in the upcoming months. So I think for that, I mean, that's the first thing, is it would be good to see that plan. The second is, given that we have a new contract for DWP, is that being impacted? So that, because I know that there would have had to have been a massive recruitment, or will be a massive recruitment for those new jobs that the Minister announced. Where does that fit? Is that then drawing more people out of the existing services that they were delivered to go and deliver that new contract for DWP? That's another kind of query that I have. And then the other was around the maintaining, protecting and providing access to the historic state care sites and historic environment. And as a consequence, a number of sites subject to full or partial closure. It would be good to get an idea of how many are impacted there and what the extent of the impact is. So particularly how many are subject to that full or partial closure and what are the knock-on effects then. That would be good to get.
And it is actually on the list that has been flagged to the Permanent Secretary, so there will be an early opportunity next week, but I think again it's one of those issues we need to keep a finger very much on the pulse of because of those impacts, which helpfully the department have set out. And I know they've referenced workforce planning and there is plan, but it'd be good to see more detail as you say. Kelly, please.
Sorry, it was just to come back to that 4.7. Can I just get a clarification from the department? When they say a vacancy, they may well have a vacancy within the department. That's a position that is open to be filled. Are they currently filling it with temporary staff from agencies? So while there are all these jobs that are available, are any of them currently being filled, or do they see it as these are the roles that are available even after all the agency staff that are currently working are in position? My other question is, given the fact that those agency staff who are working within DFC have already been trained to do the job, is there any proactive look at those agency staff to directly recruit them? Because we don't need to repeat the skills training again if that's the case. The other thing on that 4.7 is I am very concerned about the comment that the tenant participation strategy is impacted by this loss. If the Minister is taking forward some of those actions to do with private tenancies, how can he do that without a tenant participation strategy? The co-production and co-design element then cannot be fulfilled. So if we can just ask, in light of that recognition, what's happening, yeah, so it's a bit of a concern for me that there's something that's actually ongoing currently now within the department that we don't have that co-production and co-design ability. Yep, the other one I just have is 4.8, social inclusion matters. That I'm very confused by what's happening. So the Minister said to us when he was here that as a committee we can receive updates from his department with regards to social inclusion strategies that he's involved with. But if Communities has taken the lead on this seems to suggest that Communities can access information from all of the other departments who are playing a role in the social inclusion strategies. So, Standing Order 64, as is mentioned, can allow us to do that, but I don't think that we can compel any other department to provide us with information. I was going to suggest, could we write to the Chair's Liaison Group and provide a copy of this and just say, can there be clarification of how this will work going forward? And if the Chair's Liaison Group perhaps could take a look into this to clarify where there's cross-departmental strategies, yep, how they can be reported appropriately, yep, to each individual committee then.
And the scrutiny applied. Yeah, no, I think that is a key fundamental issue and a complex one. So I think that's a good suggestion on the CLG if members are content. And you've got Kelly's other two. You're taking up on those. Ciara?
It's obviously in relation to 4.7, page 63. I am kind of very, very concerned as well regarding the impact due to vacancy numbers, where there is only 21% of people being supported in the front line to support them in the pathways to employment. So I think it's critically important, maybe to reiterate to the Minister, when it comes to the Building Sustainable Prosperity Programme, and given, as Maurice had mentioned, the huge deficit that there will be next year, it's pertinent that that's reiterated with the Minister, that programme would be vitally important in the neighbourhoods to help support our frontline staff within the department and our Community Benefits Office, particularly when 80% aren't getting that support. Secondly then, and I would agree with Shan in relation to the state of our historic environment and our sites, I'm really, it is a bit shameful, to be honest, where that sits at the minute, and I do agree. I think it would be useful to get an outline of the sites that are partially opened, etc., just to see the scale of it. But likewise, the department had mentioned there is a delay in planning consultations, and likewise there is a large backlog yet to be listed, unlisted buildings. So I would really like to unpack that. What's the scale of that from a numbers point of view? In which constituencies are these current application forms for listed buildings included in? Because I think it would be quite shameful if we're not looking after and protecting our listed buildings. So it's really just to unpack and get further detail to get a better picture across each of our constituencies across the north. What's the scale of it in numbers?
Okay.
That's okay, thank you.
Thank you. Morris, go ahead, please. Still not hearing you, Morris, now, and your microphone looks open, so I know there sometimes can be another issue.
Open now, can you hear me now, sir?
Hearing you now, Morris, yes, loud and clear, thank you.
Sure, just to follow up on that the historical buildings and historical sites, etc. If we could also have a list, you know the way properties sometimes and they change hands, and the new owner may not be aware of the historical interest or significance of a property or a piece of land that they have purchased. So I'd like to know, do the department keep updating the owners of property that's of historical significance?
The owners of properties which are of historical significance. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Morris, thank you.
Just to follow on from Morris, I know that the historical division must just say, I'm fed up listening to her. Kirkhaven Harbour is a point in fact. It's a listed building that, to be honest, the private owner, they're not looking after it and it's crumbling into the sea. That historical division doesn't have enough money to take legal action against that private owner. So we're going to lose a significant landmark because they don't have legal money to actually take private owners. So they may well be updating the private owners, but there's no teeth to it if they don't have the legal backing. It's maybe to ask them, is there any investment strategy to protect our historical environment through legal? You know, if they have to go that far to take legal action, can they now do that? Or is that something that is just left?
Yeah, and the fact that it's irreplaceable, like you can recreate and do all sorts of things, but what you lose, and lose forever.
Can I double check? So is any plan to seek investment to be able to have teeth? Is that it?
Take legal action
Investment.
where appropriate. Yeah.
Morris, is your hand back up again, or is that from previous? From previous. Yep, thank you. Daniel?
Just to follow on this, I had a number of meetings in relation to historical sites in West Tyrone over the last few years. It's deeply frustrating because the division responsible within the Department for Communities are telling me themselves that the underfunding is a major hurdle and obstacle to ensuring the preservation and maintenance of these buildings by private landowners. You know, an example in Militia and I's constituency is Herdman's Mill. It's crumbling into nothing. It's actually an extremely dangerous site now, the historical element of it. And we're being told by those representing this department, the department, that there's nothing they can do. They have no money. They can't take action. The figures are shocking. And if this is how the built heritage across this place has been treated, we won't have much left in a few years' time. It is absolutely ridiculous when I've delved into some of the funding figures, to be honest, and it really needs to be flagged. You know, if you take something on the scale of Herdman's Mill, and I'm sure Inside Mills, and I'm sure that Kelly's example is similar, it would take a substantial investment even by a private landowner to bring these buildings up to the standard that is expected. And therefore it is actually resulting in preventing the people buying and investing in the property. You know, it would take quite a substantial amount of money to do any restoration work to the Sion Mills, Herdman's Mill. So there's examples over the place, but you're right. If the owner is in a position to even do the bare essentials in terms of ensuring that the site is secured and protected from vandalism or arson or whatever, then there needs to be more teeth with the department to ensure that's the case. At the minute, that isn't, and it's a free-for-all. You know, a lot of the sites that I've been to, you can walk freely into them. They're extremely dangerous, and they are crumbling everywhere. So it's a major problem.
Thank you. Okay, members, thank you for that. So moving on then to agenda item 5, which is correspondence, and the memo for which is at page 73, I think, actually, or 73 or 74 of your main memo, and there's another at page 3 of your table papers. As per the approach to matters rising, again, I intend to go through these items by number and grouped and ask if you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So starting off then with items from 5.2 to 5.6 inclusive. Are there any issues there that members wish to flag or highlight? So I think I seen Kelly first, then Sian.
Just to say, I mentioned it earlier in the meeting, can we ask for a written update even from Department for Communities with regards to the executive programme on paramilitarism and organised crime? It's just to hear the detail of what they're actually carrying out within the department for that programme. It's mentioned in the communications there, but the detail isn't there. And then in 5.3, page 7, I think it starts page 77, can we write, I know that the department has said they've mentioned to the Department of Education about the promotion of pensions within the Learning for Life and Work. But if we could also maybe write to the department, to the Minister of Education, to ask that happens. And then finally 5.4, the departmental climate change and action plans. I don't see anywhere where they have updated terms and conditions of any grants and contracts going out either directly from the department or from arm's length body to require recipients to also follow climate change agenda actions and to maybe include that within their applications. If we could ask maybe if that's part of that.
Yeah.
So the question is whether or not the terms and conditions have been updated to require recipients of funding.
Grants and contracts, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ciara?
Just following Kelly, it might be actually useful, given that the department's climate change action plan for 24-25 has been published, it might be worthwhile if we have the time to invite the officials in from the department to give an update just in relation to the climate change actions within the department. I think it might be useful for all members to get an update. Would that be?
Yeah, members content. Thank you. Item. Sorry, Sian.
Yeah, it was just on the 5.2, the epoch. It might be useful to understand what conversations are being had to look at that 8 million shortfall, and whether that would have to be directed to TEO. I think they are the kind of the lead department on that the programme. So just whether there are conversations being had at this point for the next, not this financial year coming, but the next financial year, for that 8 million.
Thank you. And I would draw attention members to 5.5, an invitation from Golden Thread Gallery. And would members be content to be added to the list of possible visits, maybe for the summer term? I think we're fairly booked up as is, but welcome invitation, and maybe we'll look at it. So we'll put it on a wee list there. Members content. So moving on then, members, to items 5.7 to 5.9 in correspondence. Inclusive there, any issues, Deputy Chair?
I think 5.7 was really welcome in relation to the forthcoming budget for 25-26 and the correspondence from the Department of Finance, the Minister, to NICFA in particular. And I think her decision, the Finance Minister's decision to ring fence the monies towards new social housing, which will complement the allocation and capital funding that the DFC have towards housing, is good news. It's a good news story, so it's probably just to note on that. And then likewise regarding 5.8, it's the Housing Policy Panel and their request to brief the committee. I would welcome and agree, maybe we should as a committee in the forthcoming weeks host the Housing Policy Panel. I think it'd be pertinent. I would just like one of the elements, and Kelly, you had mentioned it earlier, and I know we raised it back, I think probably April of last year, just in relation to the tenant participation survey, and we did receive a response from the committee on that outline. I think I would be really keen that we focus in on that, particularly when the housing panel, because I would really keen just to see their thoughts on it. So in writing, maybe to invite them, that we ask them as a key area of particularly concern for me, because I think it's really critically important where the voices of our local people across, whether it's housing or wherever it is, are fully engaged throughout a process. It's all about co-design, co-production, and we really need to be, as a committee, encouraging that and supporting that. So I think that in inviting the panel, we asked them to really, really focus in on that and any concerns they may have and any work that they've done on it, if that's okay. Thank you.
Members consent. Thank you. And the tabled memo is all press releases, so just ask if members are content then with the memo otherwise. Okay, thanks members. Moving on then to item 6, which is the rescission of the committee motion. So as you're aware and flagged last week, the committee agreed not to move the motion on welfare supplementary payments on Monday 9th December. This was in light of the announcement by the Minister that welfare reform mitigations would be extended. As a result of the decision not to move the motion, from a procedural perspective, then we have a committee decision which has not yet been actioned. So can I now ask members if they are content that the committee rescinds its decision to table a motion?
Agreed.
Members. Item 7 then is an SL1. We have 4, I think, items here in SLs and SRs. First one is SL1, the Social Security Benefits Operating Order, page 151. And while these are all to some degree technical, because there are a number of them, the clerk has arranged that officials are on hand should there be any questions. So just to flag that, members. But I'll go through them individually and members can decide as we go. So I'd welcome then the officials, and if there are questions, we'll come to you. We'll see how we get on. Thank you very much. So the officials are Janice Irwin, and Janice is Deputy Principal Social Security Policy Legislation and Decision Making, and we're also joined by Patricia Quinn, who is Staff Officer in Social Security Policy Legislation and Decision Making. Members, the Secretary of State has determined that benefits linked to prices have not maintained their value in relation to the general level of prices, and these benefits will be uprated for 2025-26 by 1.7% in line with CPI. This order is the principal statutory rule given effect to the increased benefits rates. So do members have any comments or questions for the officials, or are you content for the Department to proceed to make that rule?
Content.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you members. Moving on then to item 8, which is SL1, the Social Security. Just a second, I didn't read that fully into the record and I think it better in case it... So the agenda item that we were discussing there is the Social Security Benefits Operating Order NI 2025 on page 151. Are members content that the Department makes the rule?
Agreed.
Thank you members. And agenda item 8 then is SL1, the Social Security Benefits Operating Regulations NI 2025, and that's at page 162. Members, the rates of most Social Security benefits, pensions and lump sum payments are reviewed each year and usually operated in April. These 2025 regulations are part of a package of statutory rules relating to the annual operating. Do members have any comments or questions for the officials, or are you content for the Department to proceed to make the rule?
Content.
Content. Thank you, members. Item 9 then is SL1, the Mesothelioma lump sum payments.
I was waiting.
Don't ask me to repeat it. Conditions and Amounts Amendment Regulations NI 2025, page 168. So members, I am going to have to repeat it because the 2025 regulations amend the Mesothelioma lump sum payments to increase the amounts payable under the Mesothelioma scheme by 1.7% in line with the uprating of industrial injuries benefits from April 2025. Do members have any questions or even comments for officials? No. Thank you. Are members therefore content for the Department to proceed to make the rule?
Content.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 10, members, is SL1, the Pneumoconiosis, etc., Workers' Compensation Payment of Claims Amendment Regulations, NI 2025, page 174. So these regulations amend the pneumoconiosis, etc., workers' compensation. It is in order to increase the amounts payable under the 1979 scheme by 1.7% in line with the uprating of industrial injuries benefits. Any comments or questions, members? Thank you. Members then, are members content that the Department proceed to make the rule? Yes. Thank you. Members, the Social Security Miscellaneous Amendments is item 11, agenda item 11, SR. This is an SR 2025/3. The Social Security Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations NI 2025. So the cover memo is at page 179 and a copy of the rule is at page 181. We considered the SL1 for these regulations at our meeting on 12th of December 2024 when we were content for the Department to proceed to make the rule. So do members have any objection to the rule?
No.
Thank you. Therefore, can I put the question formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/3, the Social Security Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members.
Sorry, can I just, in terms of that universal credit bit, the preventing the mixed age and the limited capability for work, I would love that to be one of our information sessions, informal information sessions if possible.
Because that is a melt. Yeah.
That was one of the ones I'd actually going through.
We included as part of a session.
Yes. Yeah.
You clear on the details, Claire? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go back to you.
Okay, thank you, members. So, members, then, to allow the team to set up the PowerPoint presentation for the next briefing session with NI Water, can I suggest we take a 5-minute comfort break, allow the staff to get all set up, and we will resume then in 5 minutes' time, or say just before 10 to. Okay. Yep, thank you, members.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, sound.
Morning.
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 Well spotted, Gary.
Probably guessed that, didn't you?
Auspicious start. Okay, members, so we are now back in session. We're moving to agenda item 12, which is a briefing by NI Water on housing supply and infrastructure. Briefing paper, member, starts at page 195 of your pack there. So I'd now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. So we have Dr. Jerry Curran, who's Director of Engineering and Sustainability. We have Stephanie McCullough, who is Director of Customer Operations, and Gary Lothar, Head of Developer Services, Metering and Billing. So Gary, I'd invite yourself maybe, I think it is, leading on a brief opening statement there, and then we can get to members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for providing us with the opportunity to come and present to the committee this morning on some of the issues relating to our wastewater and infrastructure and the impact, I suppose, that these are having on our ability to facilitate new connections. As you've said, with me today with Stephanie, Gary and myself to take you through this brief presentation. I suppose what we will endeavour to do is provide an overview of the wastewater infrastructure assets, the issues and the impact that they are having on the construction of homes, and hopefully give you some potential solutions that we have been working on. The flow to do that is really a bit of background about Northern Ireland Water itself, the current wastewater challenges, trying to highlight what those are. We need to talk, I think, about our PC 21 and 27 funding. So these are really our price control business plans for the current 6-year period and the future 6-year period. And then we'll get specifically into the impact on the development connections and take your questions, obviously, at the end. So a bit of background. Northern Ireland Water was formed in 2007. It's independently regulated and bound by the Companies Act, with DFI as our sole shareholder, with a duty to ensure we're properly funded. The utility regulator determines on that funding what is necessary, as outlined in our business plan. Our efficiency and performance is independently benchmarked against GB peers, and I can assure you that we are seen as being a very efficient company in terms of our delivery and running. And our shareholder has an obligation there to cover the CDL budget for all of our capital expenditure. And as I said, the PC21, you'll hear us talk about that this morning. It's a price control period that runs from 2021 to 2027. And as you can see from the sort of graphic on the right-hand side, Northern Ireland Water finds itself very much in the middle of a lot of stakeholders with conflicting pressures that we find ourselves in. And we endeavour to balance these requirements and deliver the solutions whilst continuing to provide clean, safe drinking water and protect the environment. But I suppose for today's discussions, the interaction with the Environment Agency, NIEA, is probably the most pertinent to the discussions this morning. So a bit about Northern Ireland Water. It costs around £680 million each year to deliver the water services to Northern Ireland. We have thousands of assets at a value of over £4 billion and are operated and maintained to provide those services. This includes over 43,000 kilometres of water mains and sewers, 1.5 times longer than the entire road network in Northern Ireland. And I think it's, we produce over 600 million litres of clean, safe drinking water every day, and we treat approximately 360 million litres of wastewater every day, but also that's dependent on rainfall and so on. For the discussions today, the stats down the right-hand side there are the numbers of the wastewater assets. And I probably would just like to highlight a couple of things there. You'll see that we actually operate over 1,000 wastewater treatment works. We have 24 water treatment works, but over 1,000 wastewater treatment works. And we have nearly 2,444 storm overflows. And if you look at that income per head of population, it's significantly more than any other company in the UK. And it's those two assets together that are the primary reason for the constraint in Northern Ireland in terms of the development opportunities. So just looking at those storm overflows, first of all, they are essentially the pressure relief valve for our wastewater networks. We've tabled there where those 2,444 are, and the number that are unsatisfactory in each of those council areas. So you can see it's right across Northern Ireland. It's not just related to one specific council area. Thank you. And there's about 40% of those at the minute are unsatisfactory. The number are likely to increase because we have quite a significant modelling programme that is ongoing at present, and as we work our way through that, we are likely to see those numbers increase. And these are the excessive polluters, and they need to be upgraded or closed. In addition, just to note, there's 73 of those wastewater treatment works have now reached capacity right across the council areas. So environmental standards, they're likely to tighten, and then potentially even more storm overflows will become non-compliant, and facilitating new connections will become even more difficult. And that's something that I'll try and elaborate a little bit more on here this morning. I think we need to talk about sort of funding because, as I've sort of said, there's a lot of failing assets. They need fixed or closed. We need to do work at it, so funding is very pertinent to the debate. We had our PC21 plan set out in readiness, and we had quite a significant increase in funding there for the wastewater recovery element, so particularly to try and address the failing wastewater assets. And the quote there really sort of highlights it's not Northern Ireland Water that is suggesting that the assets are an issue, it's the Environment Agency. And they have stipulated that it's both a public health and an environmental issue that needs to be resolved. And the continuing deterioration of water quality in Northern Ireland will ensue if nothing is done. So we had a development plan in place. We had the supply chain ready to deliver. So we are very much in a position where we can do what we said we wanted to do for PC21. However, with the funding allocation that we have, and we appreciate that, I mean, it's a difficulty right across all departments. The funding allocation that we have shows a shortfall of about £0.8 billion in this 6-year period, and in essence puts a halt to the wastewater recovery that we would like to do. We have little or no ability to deliver on that recovery plan, and that's what we're seeing at the minute as in these current years until we get to the end of this price control period. However, we've already started planning for PC27, the next 6-year period, and we're looking at the sort of continuation of our current funding levels that we've received. And you can see that the area highlighted in the red at the top of the graph shows the work that we will not be able to get to. And not only is it wastewater, it's starting to impact on our water, our ability to enhance our water assets as well as the wastewater assets. We are not able, as it stands at the minute, to look at providing sludge disposal facilities or even indeed looking at how we transition to a net zero environment. And the emerging view of the impact for Northern Ireland as a consequence is quite severe. So all of that puts Northern Ireland, we believe, perilously close to wastewater being a permanent issue. No improvement in watercourse standards as defined in that Water Framework Directive, no ability to meet the new environmental commitments that we are coming out, particularly as outlined in the Wastewater Regulation Reform Programme that we're working with NIEA on, and that in essence ending our ability to connect new homes and enterprises to wastewater network. It will directly impact the ability to deliver, I suppose, on the priorities set out in the programme for government around economy, housing and the environment. So focusing on the connections and the construction industry, hopefully I've sort of presented the rationale for why we are in the position we are in, and the position, I suppose, that Northern Ireland finds itself in. But we've done a lot of work. We're not sitting back and just accepting what we find in front of us. We've done a lot of work, and particularly Gary here in the developer services team. We've identified approximately 37,000 units that we know specifically want to connect to our wastewater system. We've gone back to those developers and advised them that 18,000 of those can connect, when the majority, with the majority requiring a developer self-funded zero detriment solution. There are, however, 19,000 that will be unable to connect to the wastewater network because they are above the high polluting assets and are unsuitable for developer-funded solutions. And there are, what it is summarising into is there's 34 areas across 23 towns that are currently closed to greenfield wastewater connections due to high polluting network discharges. So some funding for developers might unlock discrete tranches of housing. However, we don't believe it will unlock the wider development opportunities or resolve those environmental issues. So looking at those 19,000 properties that require that capital intervention, again, we've broken them down by council area just to give you a few across Northern Ireland. And we've split them down for private housing and social housing so that you can see where the greatest impact is. We have done a lot of work, particularly last summer and into the autumn, where we've been out engaging proactively with the developers, councils, the Federation of Housing Associations, and most recently we met with SOLAS, which is the sort of chief executive of the council. So we've been very much out there trying to convey the issue that we have, and the opportunity obviously to come here today is part of that. So we've been very proactive in letting people know the impact of what we are finding ourselves in. And just as a sort of footnote there, we did receive an additional 19.5 million in the October monitoring round, and with that additional money we were able to identify approximately 2,300 properties that we will be able to connect to the network. So we are, going back to what I said, we know what we need to do, and we're in a position to deliver if that funding is forthcoming. So what is Northern Ireland Water doing to help address the economic constraints in the interim period? We're very much committed to maximising the infrastructure that we have, trying to really eke out every little bit of capacity that we can. We're investigating options for targeted interventions within our funding limits, including flow transfers, strategic storm infrastructure. In essence, what we're endeavouring to do is trying to remove any unwanted water from our network to free up capacity. We're promoting those developer-led finance solutions, and as part of the planning process, we're giving robust, very clear planning responses so that developers know the implications of the assets they want to connect to. And we are arguing, as you would expect, for sustained funding to help to try and address the issues that we see before us. And there is legislation coming towards the executive to allow developers to fund upgrades to some of our NIW assets. So we believe we do not want to say no to developers, and we're doing everything within our control to facilitate the connections while continuing to protect the environment. However, I must stress the fundamental reason for the constraint on the development is NIW's requirement to protect the environment from future deterioration and aligned to the need to fix our failing assets. If we continue to connect above those failing assets, the more sewage that will be spilled into the environment, the worse the water quality will become in our rivers, lochs and seas. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Very, very useful run through some of the issues and difficulties, and indeed I also want to focus on how we address and how we work on the positives as well as that. I have to say this issue for me is one of many decades of underinvestment and historic underinvestment, and particularly west of the Ban, I have to say, and that's now coming home to roost in many senses. It's having a very negative knock-on impact in terms of people being able, and regularly we are inundated with people looking to build in their own community at their own home, which then supports the local school, the local health service, all those other, and you get a negative spiral, and it's our job to ensure that the spiral is moving the other way and to right that wrong of historic underinvestment. And I recognise that is going to take many years, just as it took many years to create the difficulty. It will likely create many years, but we have to make a very strong start on that. I do welcome the fact, and you've mentioned it there, that there has been that 19.5 million additional money which unlocks the capacity for 2,300 homes, and that is certainly positive. And I know that there are 350 of those properties in Derry City and Strabane, and again, given that historic impact, that's welcome to see that. But can you give us some information in relation to what work's ongoing on those 2,300 homes and how those were assessed, or how you've maximised the impact of that to ensure that homes are going on the ground?
Okay, I'll probably take that one. So the funding came in through that October monitoring round. As I said, we had a lot of plans already in place to deliver it at the higher levels, and we identified what projects would deliver the opportunity for the new connections. But because of the timing of it and the need to get something quickly, we're very much focused on what was in essence shovel ready. What could we get up and going quickly? We obviously had identified some work with the Derry and Strabane Council. I was up there myself talking with them, and part of it is around the expansion of houses in and around the city there. So we were very much focused on what was shovel ready, what could we get up and going quickly, and start to address the issue. But I suppose in parallel, acknowledging that there may or may not be additional money coming again, we have already started to look at what other schemes could be brought forward. So if we got additional bundles, say, of £10 million or something, what could we deliver? And part of it as well, I suppose, is there an opportunity to... Our capital programme is driven very much by ensuring compliance. So fix that storm overflow, make sure it's fully compliant. There is an option around the zero detriment approach that we get a marginal improvement possibly to facilitate housing connections, but that's something that we as NI Water can't decide upon. That needs to be a fully cross-departmental decision, but we are looking at every options that we can to try and keep that process going if additional money comes forward.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose second one from me is around, so we are acutely aware, of where the areas that the difficulties exist are, and those need to be addressed. But are we as acutely aware of where potential, in a similar linked way, where potential exists, and are you proactively liaising with planners and local councils in order to ensure that where capacity does exist, that those plans are being brought forward and houses are being built where they can be, rather than a sort of allowing a mantra of, there's too many problems, we can't get houses. Focus on where the benefits can be derived.
I'll probably ask Gary to do that. Yeah, and that there is a bit about providing potential or addressing specific applications, and we're very much focused on trying to address specific applications, but Gary's much more versed in it than I am.
So Gary mentioned, going through the slides there's 34 areas across 23 towns which are now closed for greenfield development. So we're sharing that information with councils, we're sharing that information with developers, we're sharing that information with housing associations, just so they know when they're planning their future plans to stay away from them areas until we can correct the assets that are within them areas. So just going back to the extra 19.5 million. So when we got that 19.5 million...
Before you go there, Gary, are you also sharing the information about where capacity does exist? That's what I'm asking.
So capacity exists everywhere outside of them areas, but in a lot of them areas, outside them areas which are closed, the developer will still have to make some sort of intervention. So we'll ask the developer to potentially do something to free a bit of capacity that allows his development to connect. The difficulty in them areas is that are closed is that the assets are very high polluting. They're usually, sometimes they're what we call dry spillers. So they're actually spilling to the environment at tea time when there's a wee bit of a drizzle. So there's very little that can be done there apart from a capital fix. So all of our customers are very aware of them areas, and we're asking them to come and speak to us early and just try to stay away from them areas. The 19.5 million we did use a lot of that to target them specific areas. So there was 5 main projects. It came with a caveat, the money, that it had to be shovel ready, so the design had to be done and had to start this financial year. So there was projects in Upper Falls which released about 1,300 homes, and that was a lot of social homes. We were able to go ahead in West Belfast, about 600, I think it's about 600 social homes. But there was other big projects in Carryduff, there was projects in Drumahoe, Antrim, Templepatrick and Mollusk. So that was prioritised in terms of where we get the best bang for our buck in terms of that 19.5 million, but it had to be sitting shovel ready with designs ready to go.
Okay. Final one from me then, I'll go to members, is where can those developer led funding solutions derive the most impact, and how are you working to ensure that impact is delivered?
We have a process for that with developers. So what we say to developers is, come and speak to us, and come and speak to us early. Even come and speak to us before you buy a site. So we have a process which we ask them to go through, which is first of all a pre-development inquiry. We'll tell them if there's any constraints with that site, whether it's water capacity, wastewater capacity, odour or anything else, but it's usually wastewater capacity. If there is a wastewater capacity issue, we have a specific team in Northern Ireland Water which will work with that developer to try to develop a developer funded and driven solution for that particular site. So there's a process there in place which most developers now would be very familiar with. It's been up and running for about 4 years now.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go first of all to our Deputy Chair, and then have Kelly, Andy, Brian and Melissa at this point. So Ciara,
thank you, Gary, Dr. Gary and Stephanie, and it was really, really useful, your presentation and the slides, and it is quite technical.
Yes.
So, and you'll allow me hopefully to indulge, I'm obviously a representative of the Foyle constituency, and it's quite alarming when you see the graph, how specifically where particularly Derry City and Strabane District Council area in the northwest is a third basically of the properties that require NI water capital. So it shows the core need and direction. And then specifically, I hope you'd mind, I'm assuming you would have maybe detail on the H2 phase 1, which is massive potential and there's massive ambitions to try and meet the housing need when we do have over 600 people currently in temporary accommodation and over 6,000 people currently awaiting a social home. So it is quite a pertinent issue. So just on the H2, and I have been liaising obviously with the local housing associations, with the developers over the past few years, just in regard to the capacity, for my understanding in particular, what's the evidence that the H2 lands has reached its capacity? Because you've highlighted the areas and the towns that there is absolutely no capacity. In relation to the H2, is there still capacity at this moment in time? And could a delivery phase happen, allowing potentially, because I know currently the likes of, there is applications in and they've been liaising with yourselves for 250 homes. initially, and that's been ongoing this past few years. So can I have an understanding of the capacity around that? And then secondly, obviously, in relation to the wastewater treatment plant, obviously we're aware Braidwater offered to and advised that it needed upgraded, and we're well aware, it's been in the papers, how that increased from 7 million to 14 million. I just can't understand the scale of that increase, even if you take in inflation and stuff. So, you know, is that an accurate estimate, and how did you come to that figure? So that's kind of the two areas and the two key questions I would ask.
I'll maybe take the H2 question. So
yep.
The constraint with H2 is actually the sewer infrastructure between that H2 development and the treatment works. So the sewers there are at capacity. If we continue to put more wastewater into them sewers, it would cause flooding, cause out of sewer flooding, and we have models that we can use to predict that happening, and that's what that's showing. Within that area, there's also an H1 development, so there's been a number of temporary connections made from that H1 development into the existing into the wastewater infrastructure there, the existing wastewater infrastructure, which has used up all the capacity there. So there's new sewers and there's new pumping. There's two new pumping stations required, and there's new sewers to take everything from H2 to the treatment works at Culmore. Currently, we have a site and we have funding to undertake one of them. We're working with the developer Braidwater around a site for the second pumping station, but we don't actually have funding secured for that second pumping station. But what we're trying to do as a temporary measure, we're trying to see if we could build just one of the pumping stations and do some rezoning in that area to free up some capacity for the initial stages of housing there. That work is actually still ongoing. There's actually a meeting with Braidwater on that next week. But it's very touch and go whether we'll be able to do anything to allow any houses to progress there or not. It'll depend on the modelling results, which are due out next week.
Just from my understanding, because obviously it is quite complicated, there is no likelihood of any connections in relation to the H2 at this moment in time.
There's a potential that we could build one of the pumping stations that is required, make some temporary changes to the networks, which may free the network in Derry to free up some capacity for H2 too. We are still looking at that, and we hope to have an answer for that next week.
Okay, and that's in relation to the pumping stations, but pre the pumping stations,
Nothing.
is there currently any capacity?
No.
So it's a blanket no capacity?
Okay. But we're doing a lot of work, to be fair, to really understand what could or couldn't be done there. And I think, to be fair, a temporary fix is not sustainable. What we would like to do is those two pumping stations and the pumping main that comes around and would connect into the main sewer that goes to the Culmore Works. And part of it is being able to transfer the foul water from those new connections, but also within the catchment, we're doing some work at trying to remove stormwater where possible. So if we can get stormwater out of our network, it frees up additional capacity, frees up capacity in the network, frees up capacity at the wastewater treatment works. So we don't look at individual assets. We're looking at the whole catchment, everything within, in essence, the boundary of the city, to try and see how, if you obviously do something upstream of a failing asset, it has a downstream impact. So we're looking at it in totality, holistically, to find solutions. I think we have a good idea what we need to do. We have an estimate of funding, and potentially if additional funding comes forward, that could be one of the ones that we would react with fairly quickly.
Could I just ask, just finally then, because obviously the general discussions is like there is no environmental risk at this moment in time, and then back you did present the Derry City and Strabane District Council there back in November, which showed minimal impact in the H2 area regarding the predicted storm overflows. So it's quite difficult in my head to try and get whereby it's a blanket,
yes,
no capacity, when there may be some room, yes, to continue to proceed. So it's just not stopped now until we have pumping stations. Is there any possibility?
There is no room in the existing wastewater infrastructure in front of H2. The sewers are at capacity. If we put anything more into them sewers, we would put customers' homes at risk of flooding. So,
would it be possible, Gary, even just to kind of get details, so when I am being contacted, I can obviously be liaising with local people or local councillors and likewise our developers, etc., just to have a real clear picture, because on one end we have a list that there's no capacity.
Yes.
H2 is not mentioned on that list, but now you're telling me there is no capacity. So it's just, and I understand it's quite technical. You're looking at the wider area, but it'd be really, really useful so we have a real clear, everyone has a clear understanding, because you see the need for homes in the city. We're in crisis point regarding homes, and it's key that there is a priority and a key effort in everybody working quite closely together to do what they can to deliver new homes, but also obviously provide safety and security for existing homes as well. So thank you very much.
Deputy Chair, you've hit the nail on the head. People need to work together to resolve this. This isn't a solution that Northern Ireland Water can do in isolation. But following the council presentation, that sort of summary of what was going on, because there was people talking about local areas that the names meant nothing to me. It was just obviously, if you lived up there, you knew what they were talking about. So we've pulled together a bit of a summary, and certainly we can provide that to you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to Kelly now, but just want to indicate to Morris that we do have your indication, Morris, and we will be bringing you in turn, so where your hand is raised. So Kelly.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation. A number of years ago, I was the infrastructure spokesperson for Alliance, and I have visited the wastewater treatment works in Belfast and other parts of the country, so quite aware of how it all works. But this is the Committee for Communities. I think we all are very aware of the financial pressures that Northern Ireland Water are under, but when I look at it, I have to say, I see the prioritisation for Northern Ireland Water. My prioritisation is where are we getting these houses, because we hear horrendous figures of the amount of money that the Housing Executive is putting into temporary accommodation when actually we need new homes built. But we know even if the Minister for Finance is able to present communities with money to build new homes, it's not going to happen because there's no cranes without drains. So you've just talked about working together. Mm-hmm. So I have to ask, when I see on your slides there, the one that talks about the interventions that are needed for the number of homes, the number of social homes listed there, for instance, in each of the council areas, it talks about Derry City, Strabane, 1,210, Ards and North Down 10. Is that homes that are already in the system, or are that the projected homes? Because that's the one thing that's missing from this, is I would have expected to see another column there thinking about partnership work and of where the Housing Executive has identified the housing stress and the number of homes that need to be built in each of those areas.
So the numbers that you see in front of you are specific applications that we know about. So we have, as Gary alluded to there, the wastewater impact assessment. So that's giving us a really clear understanding of specific applications. We also meet quite regularly, and I think there's meetings coming up either next week again with the Housing Executive to understand their future planning and where they would like to build. So that engagement allows us to get a really good view of where things are going. And we're doing the same, for example, with the Education Library Board, where schools might want to go. So there's a lot of engagement, but what you see there are specific applications. So that wastewater impact assessment has said we want to build 4 social housing units on whatever road, or 10 in a development, whatever. So that's quite specific, but we have information in terms of the sort of longer term plans from the Housing Executive as well.
Okay. The reason why I'm sort of asking is that the existing ones is because we know that we have so many people who are homeless and are in housing stress at the moment in Northern Ireland. It's very frustrating that when we may have capital money put into communities, that we won't be actually able to take that forward because the capacity isn't there. Which brings me to the developer contributions. The developer contributions has me a little bit concerned, because developer contributions means that if you're a private developer, the cost will be put onto the cost of the houses. If you're a social housing developer, the cost comes back onto government. So in another way, government is paying for the sewage system. So I'm just wondering, the Audit Office's report has suggested 1 billion funding shortfall in the current price control. Will that be met, or is there a level where the developer contributions will successfully address that? Because I think it's...
So just to be clear, the developer contributions, so that's part of the 18,000 units that we're talking about. What we have identified is a way that developers can lead and design and construct solutions that will facilitate those 18,000 connections. That's working quite successfully, and there will be a number of social housing units within that bracket as well. The 19,000 and the subsequent 3,400 there for the social ones, they need capital intervention. So that is not going to be funded by developers.
Okay.
Maybe I think you're talking about the very last bullet point on the last slide, so around the legislation change piece to allow developers to fund upgrades to the wastewater infrastructure assets. So that's not the solution here, we don't believe. So we have had a number, as part of our engagement over the summer when we were going out speaking to developers about all the constraints, we asked developers how much could they realistically afford to contribute, and we think it may solve about 10% of the 19,000 that can't go ahead. Because of the scale of investment that is needed in the wastewater infrastructure, it's not going to work for developers to fund all that, and as you say, that them costs are just going to be passed on to other government agencies and to private home buyers. So it's not the answer, but it may help in a small number of scenarios where a developer might approach NI Water and say, I'm going to build a big development here. You have an asset here which is failing. Can I give you the money to fix it? Currently, we have to say no because our legislation doesn't allow for that. So that's a wee bit of a change to legislation that will allow a wee bit of work to go ahead in some circumstances.
So can I ask just on the prioritisation? We know that the Housing Executive have identified housing stress across Northern Ireland. The figures that I see here, some reflect what I know of that hasn't been applied for yet. So Derry and Strabane, we know that there's housing pressures. Belfast, we know there's housing pressures. When the investment, I'm just thinking about that £19.5 million, which looks like it equates to about 8,500 per house. When that money is spent, is it spent prioritising the areas that the Housing Executive have identified are in housing stress, or is it just where you have identified where you have problems? Because that's where my problem is, that it's not government departments and funding working in tandem, working together.
So when an application comes, so our programmes of work are based on ensuring that our assets are compliant. Once they're compliant, development can go ahead. We don't specifically focus at the moment in terms of providing something specifically for housing or indeed specifically for social housing. So when that additional funding came ahead, it was schemes that generally gave housing opportunity. It wasn't focused, we didn't pick and choose on trying to focus on social housing. We're not really able to do that, and it's very much on what is ready to go at that moment in time.
If the rules were changed and Northern Ireland PLC said we cannot keep going and keeping people in poverty and the negative social impact that it has for not having a forever home, would that be you have to maintain what you're currently doing in order to keep the standards up? Plus,
to drive those price control periods in the business plans, we follow social and environmental guidance, and that really dictates what should be priority. So clean, safe drinking water is probably the top priority, and then wastewater is further down the lines. And so if you wanted to facilitate a focus on housing, that would be the place to do it in that social and environmental guidance.
Absolutely. I just think, Chair, just to say, from my point of view, I cannot continue to live as an elected politician when we have people sleeping on the streets or without a forever home, because what's underneath the ground is preventing houses if we have money that is available in the next budget to build those houses. So we'll maybe come back to, I know we'll probably ask questions of the Housing Executive of what they're doing to ensure that prioritisation is brought forward given the horrendous homeless figures that we have. But thank you very much. Yeah.
Very briefly, Keira.
Just very briefly regarding the guidance, the social environmental, is it quite specific, or is there any generalisation that housing could be seen to be included in under social?
I mean, it's the guidance is issued where we interact with all the key stakeholders that we outlined there, and it's that social environmental guidance will give us our priorities, and the first one that and it's based on the public feedback and customer feedback, and clean, safe drinking water is the key one. I mean, because it's a health issue, but there isn't anything specific in there about addressing housing or social housing.
Protecting the environment would be another key part of it.
It'd be useful maybe if you could forward maybe a copy, just of. It'd be useful just to see, have a clear breakdown.
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your presentation. I think you've obviously presented what is a very stark picture currently and moving forward. Not to miss obviously quote, in terms of housing, and obviously that's where we're primarily tasked to look at, and you'd made reference to the developer-led contribution. Are you able to give us any flavour as to the average amount that developers are having to pay for that solution?
Or I couldn't give you a specific figure on that. I suppose we work through a process with the developer. It will be the developer does their own design and he funds it themselves. I don't have the information.
If NI Water were doing it, then what would it cost you to upgrade that infrastructure?
So the developer contributions that we're talking about, which are currently happening, are generally around stormwater offsetting. So what we're saying to the developer, can you take stormwater out of the system to free up capacity for your new development? So we'll help them find an area where they could do that. It could potentially be a school or a car park, and we'll highlight the area. We'll agree the storm flows that will be reduced, but then it's up to the developer to do that design and to fund that himself and to do that work himself.
And of those conversations and engagements you've had with developers, how many occasions have you had it conveyed back to you that it is unaffordable or potentially jeopardised the development as to the cost?
It is an issue. I couldn't give you a number on how many occasions, but not all developments will go ahead because the developer doesn't want to make doesn't want to pay for the contribution. But that's really a decision for the developer.
It's very much an economic decision for that developer. Is going ahead and doing that viable for that site. We are saying, I mean, we will put forward proposals that they can take up themselves, but at the end of the day, on that sort of developer-led and funded piece, it's very much up to them, and it's a commercial decision for them whether they want to do that or not.
Could you follow up maybe after this meeting with numbers on that? Because I'd be interested in drilling down deeper into that to see what the true picture of the challenges are, and equally what the costs are, because NI Water, obviously you're doing this as your bread and butter, you must have some type of indication as to what those costs are. And then if we jump across to the comments you made in relation to the unsustainable aspect of it for developer contribution, have you any estimate as to what the cost is to upgrade those where it's not sustainable for a developer to provide a contribution?
So on the ones where there isn't an option for a developer contribution, we heard the member talking about going down and seeing the works at Duncrew. Duncrew Works is one of those failing assets and would need to be upgraded to facilitate connections sort of in the Belfast catchment. I mean, the current cost of that is 150 to 200 million pounds. Obviously, there's no way that a developer is going to be able to afford that sort of money. So it is very much the significant infrastructure investment needs that are required over and above the sort of, I mean, what Gary talked about and the change in the legislation was where maybe a developer could pay for a small pumping station, that type of thing. But once you get into the much bigger trunk mains, networks and treatment works, then it's just not viable for a developer to do.
So for those 19,000 properties you've mentioned in your presentation, what would the cost be to be able to connect all of those 19,000 properties?
That would fall out of the capital works programme, and we're looking circa to do all of that capital works programme is something in the order of £600 million a year, which is for both clean water and dirty water. So, and approximately half of that is the wastewater enhancement piece, which is, that's so how it breaks down into those areas. I don't have figures on, but the overall programme and the enhancement is probably in the order of that for the wastewater.
So you can obviously correct me if I'm wrong. Significant and perhaps unaffordable would be the comments. So on that note, in terms of obviously moving forward, and you've outlined in your presentation a number of steps and measures that NI Water are taking, which clearly without significant capital investment from this place, and we are all very aware of the capital pressures and the likelihood of that continuing persisting for many years to come. Have NI Water proactively looked at any other models, or has DFI instructed NI Water to look at any other models? And what I'm getting at here is mutualisation, but not mutualisation where it puts a cost onto the consumer, i.e. householders. I know obviously businesses, etc. already pay for their water, but have you looked at any other funding models in order to try to turn the curve here?
I think the discussion around funding and how Northern Ireland Water's funding is very much a decision for the executive and the departments within the executive. It's Northern Ireland Water. I mean, what we are looking for is sustainable funding by whatever means. It's really the model used, and there's many out there, and there's a lot open for debate at the minute. It's really a decision for the executive and Northern Ireland itself. This is a societal issue. You know, we find ourselves in terms of trying to deliver solutions, but what we're talking about here is a societal issue.
But for example, and the last question on this one, has NI Water, given that you're the subject matter experts in this area, have you made any assessment, for example, of mutualisation, the positives or negatives, and fed those back into DFI?
As I say, the funding, what we have fed back in is what is required in terms of funding, and that sustainable need for funding. How that's delivered by the Northern Ireland Executive is entirely up to the Northern Ireland Executive.
Okay, appreciate that, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. And moving then to Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your information so far. I want to clarify what funding NI Water does receive. I'm a bit confused reading these figures. You have the chart there of your plan,
yes,
and then the next one where it shows a shortfall.
Yes.
I understand NI Water has received some significant increases over recent years. So can you tell us the recent figures overall? Is 2022-23, was it 291 million? Is that right? Is that what was received?
So what we're working to at the minute for our capital programme is a figure of 321 per year, £321 million per year. That's what we're, and if you look at the slide where it shows the underfunding, that sort of cut-off level is approximately £321 million per year is what we're working to at the minute. Obviously, we have been fortunate enough, and there's been some top-ups to that, but you know, the key one we're working to is that figure.
Yeah. And nobody is questioning or doubting the need for significant investment, you know, in the water infrastructure and the wastewater infrastructure. But there has been some. What have the increases been over recent years to the overall funding for NI Water, and is there any projection going forward?
So the projections going forward then are substantially, the need for substantial increases over and above that figure that we're working to. The 321 gives us for that PC 27 time frame a need for £1.9 billion for the wastewater maintenance and so on, and a further £1.8 billion for that funding required to address the investment catch-up and to address the regulation and reform. So, I mean, we're talking about very substantial volumes or quantities of money here, well above what we are currently currently working to.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of your statistics for number of properties that can and can't connect, as I recall, when the infrastructure minister was on the View in November, he didn't recognise the 19,000 figure units when that was put to him. Can you explain more then? Is this based on planning applications? They're not. I know there's a number of properties that have been built and can't connect. Maybe you could clarify how many of those there actually are, and well, what was the circumstances of those? Was it a negative planning condition that they had to get agreement with yourselves? But the 37,000
Yes.
and the 19,000.
Yes.
What is that based on?
Okay, so to be quite clear then, so we instigated this process called the wastewater impact assessment. So we have asked, and the engagement has gradually grown over the years with developers, and that process was to come and talk to us, as Gary outlined before. Come talk to us early, come and talk to us before planning, so that we can get a really good understanding of what actually are your proposals, where you want to do them, what are the numbers, and so on. And those wastewater impact assessments, because the developers engaged us, and we essentially provide them with a small feasibility report of what can or can't be done. We feel they are a really good reflection of the need out there, and the numbers that we're getting per year now are just probably marginally below what we expect the overall construction run rate for houses would be. So it's just under 6,000 a year that are coming through to us. So 37,000 is the overall number reflected by those wastewater impacts assessments. A lot of them prior to the planning applications.
Yeah, so most of the 19,000 will be prior to planning applications.
Okay.
So
you wouldn't find that by looking at planning applications?
You won't find that by looking at planning information. So a lot of developers, they'll engage with us, and we're saying to them, engage with us even before you buy the site. So if they don't think that they can achieve a wastewater connection, a lot of them are unlikely to go to planning.
And you find there's around 6,000 units per annum that what actually been advanced or coming to your attention? Seeking a connection or getting a connection?
6,000 connections to the wastewater system per annum.
Right. Okay. Just a couple more questions, Chair.
Briefly, if you can, please.
In terms of how properties are approved then, you said with the extra you got in the October monitoring round, you connected another 1,300 in the Falls area, for example. Can you say more about how, I deal with many planning applications in North Belfast, and where obviously, no offence, NI Water is often the bogeyman that they can't get the approval from, and then developments become unaffordable, quite often needing, what you've talked about earlier, separate the storm from the foul water, and six-figure sums, even for a small development, for those extra connections. So it's a great frustration for all elected reps, and when we see otherwise viable projects unable to proceed. So what are the criteria? You mentioned earlier about social environmental guidelines. So are those published? And how do you try to get a balance in the decisions that you're making about where developments can go ahead?
So that guidance gives us, the criteria that we need to work to. It'll give us priority in terms of what people believe is more important than others, and say clean, safe drinking water is the top priority. So that will give us a range of criteria and a prioritisation for it. But in terms of the ability to connect, we are very much focused on ensuring we're asset driven, and where the needs are for our assets, and what do we need to do to make those assets compliant. That could be in terms of the storm overflows or the wastewater treatment works, and that's what we're driven at the moment. And when we make those assets compliant, then there will be the ability for development to connect above that asset. So we don't specifically look at housing or even commercial opportunities and so on. It's making those assets compliant, and once they're compliant, then that opens up the opportunities for connections.
And do you have a priority list for water treatment works, that ones that you can progress, you can get the best value out of?
So, the whole price control period is based on those principles that I've alluded to there, and that very much will dictate the order that we will go in terms of fixing those assets, the value of them, how are they ready, and there's quite a substantial team whose job is to deliver those new assets, and they are very adept at planning and progressing those. The supply chain is in behind, so all the consultants and contractors are all teed up to do it. So we feel that we are in a good position to deliver what we need to deliver if the funding is there to do it.
That's clarification, Chair.
Really brief, Brian?
Yep. When you're talking, are you talking primarily about wastewater treatment then, or are you also talking about water supply?
There is a huge programme of work on the clean water side.
Right, so it's clean water and wastewater.
But primarily the constraints are driven by the wastewater side.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Brian. Melissa, Lanneray, Littlehull.
Fáilte Róvalig, Seán Hughes, you're very welcome. We have found you the ratchets, could you share faster, and thank you for your statement so far. Just I have two issues in one respect. It already has been raised by other members not here, but in particular by my colleague here from the Derry City and Stavan Council area, from which I come from as well. And I know, Gary, you said that you're not that familiar with the name of different areas and so on. Well, I live in Castleberg, a rural town, often in the Derg Valley, where we experience flooding and all the rest of it. So a lot of people have concerns, in particular when it comes to planning, and they find that that again, NI water is maybe, as Brian has said, the bogeyman in relation to planning applications. And I wonder to what extent that when you look at the Derry City and Staban area, do you rural-proof in terms of ensuring that people that live in rural communities are treated on an equal basis as those, we'll say, within the more urbanised districts and so on? Because very often, you know, it is the case that when it comes to rural communities, and I think of even the likes of Douglas Bridge outside of Staban, where again too, capacity is a problem and so on, and that I think to myself, if these people lived in the more urbanised areas where you get a better return for your buck as such, they would be better off. And do we end up paying a penalty because we're rural dwellers?
So our programme of works covers all development, both the concentrated urban ones and the rural. Indeed, we have a programme called the Rural Wastewater Investment Programme, which is specifically targeted at very small wastewater treatment works and ensuring that they're upgraded and get full compliance. So we don't look at one area in sort of preference to the other. We look at, as I said, the needs of our assets and what are needed to get those assets compliant and ensure that we protect the environment. And certainly with the planning, we will condition those planning responses that either it could be, yes, there's absolutely no problem at all, you can connect to it, or you actually, the developer needs to do X, Y, and Z. So we've got quite clear planning responses to give very clear direction to the planners and the developers that what is needed. And there are a number of developers, particularly in the rural areas, that will put in small package treatment plants as well. And we're very conscious about the standard of those, and we are quite strict in terms of the standards that they need to be built to before we will adopt those, because we do not want to be adopting non-compliant works. So we will ask that they're built to a certain standard, that they're tested and proven to be able to deliver the compliance figures. So that quite often is a solution in a more rural area, is a developer will put that in. That has been happening, but we have definitely taken action to ensure that what is being presented to us, both in those package plants and the sewers at developments as well, are laid to the correct standards. It's no benefit to anyone for poor infrastructure to be put up for adoption.
You reassure me actually that the rural communities are being treated on an equal basis as.
So we look at the needs of our assets and what needs to be done. So we're very much an asset-driven programme of work, and where those needs or where those assets are failing, we have a range of programmes of work, either individual projects or, as I say, that rural wastewater programme So we cover all bases.
Except that there's a lot of rural dwellers like myself that have septic tanks because there is no connection in the area.
Yes.
So we're really only talking about.
And septic tanks are not an issue for Northern Ireland Water.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's what I mean. And if we're talking about equality for rural dwellers, it's only those that actually live in develop, bigger developments.
Yes.
Semi-rural.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My other sort of question as such, or not question, statement, just is that you alluded to the fact earlier on too that what it requires is cooperation by all of the vested interests in that in relation to NI Water and its role. With the Department of Communities, if the Ministerial Advisory Group for Architecture and the Built Environment was established to support communities, developers, local authorities and government to create high quality places, buildings and landscapes that promote well-being, sustainable futures and the economy. To what extent have you had any communications in that with the Ministerial Advisory Group?
To be honest, I'm not aware. I would need to go away and have a look at that specific one. I couldn't sit here and say I'm aware of exactly what it is, but we do engage with a lot of the responses back to different requests for advice. So I imagine we have, but I couldn't sit here honestly and say we have or haven't.
Yes, Graham.
Thanks, Melissa. So we're going now online then to Maurice Bradley. Go ahead, Maurice, please.
Sorry, Chair.
We're hearing you, Maurice. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, very, very, very good presentation. Thank you very much. And a lot of good information has come out of your answers. But I have a few questions. One of the questions that I would have is the statistics around properties that require NI capital intervention. I don't particularly think that that's an accurate reflection, given the amount of applications that are sitting with developers not being put in because of the restrictions. Doesn't give any reflection in that there, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at. The question, Chair, that I would ask is around stormwater. In my area, and I'm sure it's the same across other areas in Northern Ireland, there are, in times of heavy rain, flood water going into the sewage water, and it causes an overspill of raw sewage into areas. And I know my office have queried this here on several occasions with NI Water. And I was wondering, government departments in the past have always been reactive and not proactive. And in your planning for going forward, I hope that you are looking at not just fixing the problem, but fixing the future problem. That the capacity that you are fixing up now will allow for development to continue for years to come without any problems. So I would be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, there's probably a couple of points to maybe draw out of that. Our capital works programme are designed for future years, and there's quite a long time frame. If we're going for a fully compliant works or storm overflow, we will build in capacity for growth, and that will be reflected from the development plans from the various councils and so on, and their ambitions for the areas. So we will build in the ability to accept increased flows, loadings, whatever it happens to be. So I can assure you that's what we do for the core capital works programme. But in terms of the stormwater as well, we also have a specific element of that capital works programme focused on removing stormwater. And I suppose you've actually highlighted the issue that we find ourselves with here, that additional stormwater getting in causes that out of sewer flooding, and that is exactly the reason that we cannot facilitate maybe additional connections within that catchment, because you said yourself you can see it coming out either from manholes in the roads or the storm overflows into the rivers, and that's exactly the reason. If we allow further development upstream of that failing asset, then that potentially could get a lot worse. But there is a bit around endeavouring to remove as much storm water as we can, because quite often the biggest volumes when it is overflowing comes from stormwater and rain events.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of other brief ones, with your permission.
Yeah, go ahead, Morris, yes.
The other thing that I'm interested in is the economic and legislative barriers that are inflexible in allowing developers to pay for infrastructure on given sites and the cost that then is passed on to the customer after that. And I was pleased to hear that you are looking at assets rather than areas because, as has been alluded to previously, the rural dweller, of which I am one, we always seem to fall behind when it comes to development, etc., etc. It's easy to concentrate in the large city areas, etc., etc. So I was keen to hear that. If you could maybe expand a wee bit on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, the work in terms of is focused, as I said, on the assets. We have a number of programs that will address issues within built-up areas and issues within the rural areas, and the impact on the environment is the same no matter, so it has the potential for worsening the water quality, whether that's in a rural area or a built-up city area, and it's very much that environmental impact and the need to improve water quality in that in the rivers, lochs and seas.
Here are the rest of the questions I have here have already been answered, so thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen and lady. Sorry.
Thank you, Morris. And finally then, Daniel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the three of you for being with us and for your presentation. A lot of the questions I had have been covered, so a few points of clarification needed. And just to put on the record as well, I've experienced quite a number of the same challenges that other members of this committee have, and indeed other members of this assembly. It's a weekly thing now, but I have to say, in terms of NA Water's teams, you've been entirely responsive, completely understanding in terms of the challenges I've brought to NA Water, and I have found in all circumstances actually solution focused in terms of trying to accommodate the various cases that I bring to your attention. So I want to put on record my appreciation to your teams widely in relation to that, because I don't think they get the acknowledgement that they need in the challenging circumstances that are actually largely well beyond their control.
Appreciate that.
So I want to put that on record. In terms of where we know what the problems are today, we know that we've got here because there's been a significant underfunding in terms of infrastructure that has been needed for a lifetime, well beyond probably the mandates of anyone in this room to some extent. It's not popular to invest in infrastructure that people can't see. That's just the problem, and we are now suffering the consequences of it. What is the total figure that is required to bring our infrastructure up to the expected standard to meet the demands of today?
Okay, and I'll probably just turn back to one of the slides there, and I'll use the one that is looking at our time frame for PC27, so from 2027 onwards for the next 6 years. At this moment in time, there's probably circa just under £4 billion required to address the needs of our clean water and our wastewater assets, and allow us to propose a strategy for the disposal of our sludge, which comes out of the wastewater treatment, and to start addressing that net zero transition. So the graph there shows 1.9 and 1.8, so it's just under £4 billion would be the requirement for that 6-year period. That will have to repeat over various 6-year periods again. So it's that sustainable funding that is required. It's not a one-off, and 6 years of work will address all of this. We've always said that it will take multiple price controls to address the underfunding issue that we've had historically, and to bring our assets up to the current standards. And bear in mind that if standards get tighter in the future, which we imagine they will do, there may be even higher costs associated with trying to address that.
So the £4 billion is required over a period of every 6 years.
So what we're seeing there for that PC27, the estimate is in around 4 billion, and we anticipate that that will be needed over a number of price control periods after that as well.
Yeah, and that's total. That's funding above what you're already receiving from the department, or is that total funding?
Oh well, no, that will be the total number. What we're receiving from the at the minute is probably just about half of that.
So we're receiving at the minute, just for the record, we're receiving what per year?
At the minute, we're working off a budget of 321 per year for our capital programme. And what we're saying is that that will get us in the order of about £1.9 billion over a 6-year period, and we need almost twice that again to start addressing the catch-up investment and being able to meet the changing standards.
Okay, so 650 million per year is required.
Something in that order, yes.
Okay. And given the challenges that the executive...
Sorry, that is for the capital works programme.
Yeah, that's the capital works programme. Given the challenge that the executive continually highlight in terms of funding and how the executive is funded, it seems quite unrealistic that we're going to get to that figure. Well, what is the cost of not doing or carrying out this necessary investment now in the long term?
I think the cost, as called out by NIEA on the wastewater side, is potentially environmental and health issues. So it's the cost will be to the environment. The water quality will continue to degrade, and potentially then health issues if we don't start to address the wastewater.
There's also an economic cost as well. The economic cost in Northern Ireland of houses not being built, of factories not being built, of schools not being built, of hospitals not being extended until the issues with the wastewater infrastructure is addressed. I've had meetings with commercial companies in confidence around wanting to invest in Northern Ireland, and we cannot connect them to the wastewater network.
Okay, so it affects every aspect of our lives and community generally, and that can't go understated. People need to understand it. We know that there's a very controversial question over whether water charges should be implemented in Northern Ireland or not. If it were the case that water charges were implemented tomorrow for domestic homeowners, what is the estimated revenue in that? Is there any projection as to how that would resolve this problem?
I think that sort of work would have to go back to the executive again to see what level of domestic charges that they would wish to apply, and that is outside the sort of the remit of Northern Ireland Water. It's very much an issue for Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland executive to resolve as to what level of charges, if any, they would like to apply. So it's not a Northern Ireland Water debate really.
Yeah, and it's something that this Assembly will need to debate in greater detail and be realistic about how we resolve these problems that we're all sharing grave concerns about. My position has been clear on water charges. I'm not in favour of them, but when I hear figures that I'm hearing today and how we resolve the problems, we need to really thoroughly explore the impact on our people generally if there is no action taken. But also this is a case for the executive in terms of where their priorities are, and if we can't extend hospitals, if we cannot build schools, if we cannot build houses for our people that are homeless, and we can't accommodate people who want to invest and create factories and build and create jobs in local areas, then the impact economically is much more substantial than the figures we're seeing. This is probably one of the biggest problems that we're facing in this place, and unfortunately the executive have failed for many years to get their handle on it. I don't envy your task at all. There's a political problem here. It's not on the part of NI Water. There's a political problem that needs to be resolved.
Thank you. So I just want to come back. Our Deputy Chair wants to pick up on an issue.
Just finally, obviously, I would like to thank you for being quite open and honest with regard to the current situation. And I did get the gist that you are providing an enabling role with regards to those that are keen to invest and develop in the area. I would just, in relation to, and you have, and I appreciate that you will provide me a written response, and particularly in relation to the H2 and whether it's feasible even in the short term in relation to being able to have some initial connections with development, but also planning ahead into the future. And just in relation to the written response, if you can, just provide maybe the evidence regarding the upgrade to Coshquan with that estimated cost jumping, because it have had the headlines as well from the 7 to 14. Just some clarity on that, I would appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Well, listen, I do want to thank you for your engagement with members there across a range of issues and across a span of time. It is a key issue, there's no question about it, and one that impacts this committee's work as well. So thank you both, all of you, for your attendance here today, and good luck in the future. Thank you.
Much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
So members, Deputy Chair has identified there one follow-up in terms of the detail around her question. Is there any other actions members wish to raise? So I'm going to Kelly.
Yeah, it was with regards to perhaps writing to the Minister and the Department. When we look at that social environmental priorities for Northern Ireland Water, health and well-being of people who are without a permanent home is a huge consideration. Of course, safe drinking water is important, but is there anything that's being done as part of our housing strategy that would enable government to work better together if that prioritisation was to include provision of social homes in order to meet the desperate situation we are in at the moment? And perhaps if that prioritisation was there could be better partnership working between Northern Ireland Water and the Housing Executive in identifying those priority areas.
Thank you. Tanya?
Yeah, I think the presentation is good. There's quite a lot that we already know. I am worried about how we're going to resolve this in the long term, because certainly the funding isn't there. But what is happening is the disadvantage, and I'm going to be parochial in terms of my own constituency, but even from an investment point of view, people that are coming to try and invest in Derry and Strabane that are told they can't get connected to the water infrastructure or simply going elsewhere, that puts us in a disadvantage. There's an equality issue here, and not just within the north in itself, from constituency to constituency, but also because we're beside the border. People are just simply going over to Donegal or elsewhere and investing there. So there's a major economic disadvantage to our people. And in various meetings I've had with NI Water, like the costs of trying to get some businesses connected where there isn't capacity and the works that are required is astronomical, to the extent that it's non-viable. It's not viable. So there's major implications here for investment and any form of development whatsoever. And businesses, people can't wait 6 years for a house. Businesses can't wait 6 years for the infrastructure to be updated. This is a problem here and now, and I just don't know what the solution is going to be, but this is going to get worse because population's increasing. So.
Okay, members, thank you for that. Thank you all.
If I could just give an example, and this is what frustrates me the most. I visited a wastewater treatment works in my area that had increased capacity. Fabulous, wonderful. The reason why the capacity was increased because of the number of tourists that go and visit in caravans over the summer. There's no identification in that area from the Housing Executive for more social homes. So they've spent money creating capacity for caravanners, but not actually in the areas where there's social home needs. So it's that prioritisation, I think, that would help communities. And if we're having an executive-led programme for government on housing, it would be interesting just to see how much we could ensure that's taken forward. But I think it's for our own minister to ask those questions of infrastructure, because it's his strategy that he.
In relation to how the social housing, a development of your earlier point on that, in that respect, and in relation to what the strategy is for communities in liaison with others to ensure that the social housing needs are met. And
because I don't think it's an acceptable excuse that could ever come forward from communities to say we had wonderful plans to build houses but we couldn't do it because of Northern Ireland Water. What is our department, what is communities doing to ensure that they're supporting the ability for Northern Ireland Water not to have a barrier to house building?
Yeah. To maximise the potential within whatever limitations, to make sure that they're maximising. I'd agree with that. If Ciara first, Brian, I'll come back.
It's just, I think we need to reinforce that prioritisation, and we do get it regarding the social and environmental and around clean drinking water and harm to the environment kind of too. But it shouldn't be all encompassing. So I would love I don't know what could be provided, but it's just getting behind the prioritisation process. Now I did ask for them to send us a copy so we can get it clear. So it might be useful once we get the copy and maybe have it on the agenda, have a review of it and just see where we're at. Because as Daniel has mentioned as well, that regional balance in relation to priority, particularly from an economic perspective as well. So we've mentioned the social, we've mentioned the environmental, but economic, there needs to be a balance. So it might be once we've received a copy and seen behind how they prioritise, we could maybe then invite them back.
Yeah.
So just an area just to maybe...
So I've Brian first, Daniel.
But just as part of our lobbying on this issue, I don't know what the correct protocol is for us, whether we can write to the Infrastructure Minister or the Finance Minister, or whether we only are meant to write to our own Minister. But just in terms of lobbying, as part of our push for increasing housing supply and delivery of the housing supply strategy, you know, that we've met with NI Water and among all the competing demands, just highlighting the importance of that capital investment, because it not, as they have set out, and we know, it doesn't just affect the supply of houses, it's also the growth of the economy and the delivery of public services are all impacted by the lack of that infrastructure. So as I say, on the back of us focusing, I suppose, initially on the housing issue, but the wider impact. So whether it be right to the executive as a whole, or whether we just do it through our own minister, I'm not sure what's the correct protocol.
Well, my understanding is we certainly can write for information and flagging issues to other relevant. So I've no issue with that at all. I think it's also crucial there, just touching upon the overarching element of it. So I'm aware in my own constituency that there are loads of areas where people. And actually, in reverse to what you mentioned earlier, Daniel, there are actually lots of young families in the south who would move and who would become working within local business, local manufacturing sector, but are prevented from doing so. And were that factored in, the local school may not be under, because there is a significant interest in living in the area. These are areas that have been to some extent depopulated, but you could actually build upon that. And I think there's a piece around, you know, flagging that and including that within plans. If for example, local schools under pressure due to but work is coming that will ease that situation, then I think we should be planning for that as well. So I think it's important overall the impact in terms of housing and the economy, as all members have said. Daniel?
Yeah, just in terms of the housing issue in itself, in recent question I've had back from the Minister, there's 21,000 vacant homes across Northern Ireland. You know, these are homes that are already connected to the infrastructure that are lying vacant that could be put to good use. You know, we really need to delve into what the Minister is doing to bring, as the Minister for Housing, and what he's doing to bring these houses into use again. You know, we do have a very serious housing crisis in many areas, but there is vacant properties. You know, Militia and I, and I'm sure Ciara and Kelly could go to various parts of their constituency, and there's quite a number of vacant properties that can be brought back into use again. So what are we doing about that? And you know, you think about town centres and repurposing town centres, and most of the town centres in any of our constituencies above the shops are all empty. And what can we do to make use out of those in terms of housing and accommodation again, bring them back into use?
Yeah, and actually also there's a point there about protecting the retail space, and I know we have that locally as well. There has been a recent discussion around vacant property. We may have some requests in, Clerk, do we, for information on vacant properties?
I don't think we have anything outstanding. I'll double check that for
you.
Yeah,
so just...
Can I just ask as well, we have the housing supply strategy, which is the executive's planned one. The objectives are to create 100,000 homes over the next 15 years. Now, we're looking at a third of those being social homes. Given the fact that the developer contribution will be coming forward, I'm not sure when to do this, if it's a written response from the department, is what consideration is the department making to this new cost? that they may not have faced as much with, say, for instance, if it was the housing executive building again or housing associations, they have X amount of money that's to build a house, but if now they're going to have to add on the sewage works as well, it's what consideration they're making of that. And can we also write to the housing executive that the 208, page 208, where we have that breakdown of the 19,000 properties that require Northern Ireland Water capital intervention to proceed? Can we also ask if the housing executive, do they have a similar breakdown of where they have identified social housing is needed, and what, you know, is there an intervention there from have they had discussions with Northern Ireland Water of how much in those areas of what's needed can actually be done because of the restrictions on sewage? Because there's no point in housing executive saying we need 100,000 houses or 33,000 houses that are social homes if half of them can't be built because there's a restriction on the water.
So yes, can we provide this to the housing executive and ask them if they have a similar breakdown of where social houses are needed?
Yeah, so this one is on page 208 is based on what's currently in the system. Housing executive will know what potentially could be in the system because of what the need is, and have they mapped the pressures from Northern Ireland Water against that to say what's actually feasible?
The place shaping team who are responsible for that, they're due in next week.
They are due in, yeah.
So it might be just writing to them to say, as part of their
We'd be interested to
presentation,
hear
we
about
would be
it.
interested to hear on that issue.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you, members. Very useful session there, and thank you for that. We are moving then on to our item 13, which is the Forward Work Programme, a copy of which is contained for you there in your packet, page 218. Sorry, Maurice, I see your hand raised before. Maybe it's on this housing issue. I missed that. Go ahead, Maurice, please. No rush, Maurice. We'll wait for your mic to come up. That's your mic on screen, Maurice. Yeah, and we're hearing you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a thing that Kelly brought up there, I don't think the projection of the number of houses needed for Northern Ireland is accurate. Given the current state of the infrastructure, it's not there to withstand that amount of houses. So that is a priority that we need to look at as a committee. And the other thing about the housing executives waiting list, if you cannot get a house and you're forced into the private rental sector, you are off the housing list. For instance, in my area, which is a large coastal area, a large area of second homes, people who are living in private rented accommodation are not on the housing executive waiting list. So therefore, the waiting list is not accurate, and it's something we need to be. I think we need to be careful of.
Yeah, and related to that point, Maurice, that's an excellent point. Related to that point, it's also not accurate in the sense of where people are asking for houses to be built, because they're being discouraged, and there is no way to capture as far, and it's been raised here before. But I think we need to, when they're considering that information, there needs to be a way to say, ideally, where would you live? Where do you want to live? And then here are the areas where potentially we can get you a house, because that's skewing the view of the housing executive as to where the demand is. It's being cut off at source almost in that way. And I again would like, if committee agree, we reiterate that the housing executive need to capture that information. It's a relatively easy adjustment, I presume, to an online or to a recording system that needs to be put in place.
And sure, just to follow on from that, that's entirely very accurate, because when you go and try and get on the housing list, people are largely desperate to get a home. And the first question that I'm asked now by constituents is, where am I most likely to get the house? Right. Not about where they want to live, close to family members or in their communities, be it in my constituency in Clady or Sion or whatever. It's where am I most likely to get a home, which tends to be the most populated area or where there's development ongoing. So it is something that is happening. And then when you ring the housing executive and say, what's the demand for this particular village? They say 0 or 2 or 3. And it's quite simply because people on the list are going where they're likely to be housed now. So it's affecting rural communities disproportionately.
I would like that indicated in writing, but I also raise the place shaping team too. It's a key factor in terms of properly shaping the places and understanding. Whatever about the challenges of then delivering, that's also a separate issue, but at least let's know the real picture. Okay, members, thank you for that. So we are then moving on to agenda item 13, Forward Work Programme, contained at page 218 of your pack. Do members have any comment, or are they content to note the forward work programme for now?
Mm-hmm.
So if Sean there,
Let's just see if we can get a wee update on where we are with the 13th of February in terms of responses, and I think it would be useful.
When I last checked, we had 7.
We now have 9.
We have 9 responses then, so it's active. It was switched on last week. We've sent a letter to 120 odd organisations, directing them to the Citizen Space Survey, seeking their input into that, and then we'll close that down before the event so that a summary of that can be fed back at the front end of our engagement event.
Fantastic. And then the other question I had was just that meeting on the 20th of February where we have AHRC and the Creative Communities project briefing. Would there be time within that session to, I know that one of our outstanding pending items is the Arts Council for Northern Ireland. Would there be time to have them in? Just I feel like that would be a really kind of, I suppose, a logical place for them to slot in. But I am aware that it might be too many briefings because we obviously have the field poverty update on that same day as well.
We'll check that out, see what the timeframes look like. It depends on the week whether we have additional legislation or delegated legislation, but we'll check and see if we can fit it in that week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Kelly?
Well, it's probably an item for any other business in relation to social housing.
I'll come back to you. So members otherwise content, other than those items, content with the Brian?
Just ask on the is that the 20th of February, the Arts and Humanities Research Council?
Yes.
What's that about?
So quite a long time ago, maybe pre the summer, we received a letter from academics based in England who are undertaking an extensive piece of research, and they were due to wind it up around the end of 2024 and expressed a slot in January, February for presentation. So that was probably in this forward work programme before we had February in it, you know.
Right.
So that's when they requested, and they've kept in contact, and they've asked about the format and how long they will have.
Are they presenting the research, or are we part of the research?
Yeah, no, they're talking about their research and the results of it, and they've asked to present it to the committee.
Okay.
If you want, I can. They've contacted me as the chair of the all-party group on the arts as well. They've been doing 5 community innovation practitioner pieces of research with government, private, public, and third sector partners to deliver new cultural research and development, exploring the potential of devolution to catalyse culture, and focus on enhancing belonging and creating a more inclusive innovation ecosystem.
Okay. Thank you. I'll come back to you, Daniel. I'm coming to AOB. Kelly, this is on.
It's still on forward work programme. I'm aware that the Citizens Initiative report on housing that they've been working on for the past few while, they're doing a presentation. There's an event, an invitation on Eventbrite that anybody can attend that. But as a committee, it might be interesting to hear what they've said. I'll be looking ahead, for instance, into March. We've a few meetings there that we don't have anything slotted in for. We commence on the 10th of March or the 17th of March. Can we maybe get in contact with Les Allenby, who's the chair, or Emma D'Souza, to ask if they could provide an update, a report or a copy of the report to the committee as well?
Mm-hmm.
Just to flag in general terms, we are expecting legislation which will very rapidly fill up some of those slots, so do bear that in mind. I certainly would certainly welcome speaking to all of those people, but those are not late because of in that sense. So just bear that in mind, more generally. Okay, thank you, members. Moving on then to item 14. Any other business, Daniel?
Yeah, Chair, just to raise. There's quite a number of social housing units that have been built in my constituency, and thank God for them. We're very appreciative of them. Some fantastic developments, really high standard. It has alleviated considerable pressure locally. I'm starting to see the benefits of it for the people I represent. But what I didn't realise is that, so the houses are built to a fantastic standard, but for a young girl or a young man or a young family, there's a substantial financial burden on them. They're handed the keys for a house that has no flooring, that isn't painted, and some have no showering facilities, but there's baths in them, which is fine. And they're expected to move into those homes. They rely on discretionary support, which would hardly cover the cost of flooring a house and painting it. And then they're expected to put in the white goods. So if you're taking a young person that's starting out, there's a substantial cost. So then they get into advance payments from Universal Credit because they've now changed the address and they're switched from ESA, if they're in it, or job seekers, whatever, over then to Universal Credit. They've gone without money because they've changed their address. They've then used their advance payment. It's causing a major financial pressure for quite a number of people. If someone's moving into the private sector tomorrow and the rent is 130 or 140 a week, if they're fortunate enough to get it at that price, it's floored, it's painted, it even has blinds in it, and it has all the white goods, fridge and cooker. People going into social homes are expected to pay for all that before they even buy a stick of furniture or essential items. It is not affordable. This is supposed to alleviate pressure on people, and I've seen a huge amount of strain on quite a lot of people over the last couple of weeks and months that are getting new homes, particularly younger people that have no furniture of their own, that are starting off for themselves for the first time, largely vulnerable people. And I really need to question why there isn't any standard flooring in some of these homes, or even the fact that they're painted. You know, there's a young girl that came to me, and to floor the house with lino, it wasn't even anything luxurious in any way, shape or form, and to have the house painted, it cost her £1,800, which she didn't have, which had to be borrowed. So there's a problem here, and it's putting people further and further into desperation and poverty. So the houses are built to an exceptional standard. Everything's done them except the bare essentials, which is actually what's needed most at that moment when someone is moving in to a home of their own. And I visited a number of people. There's people with children that are living in houses with concrete floors. So there's a major issue here with these housing associations that needs to be flagged. The rent for a housing association house in Strabane for a 2-bedroom is £153 a week before rates.
What's the ask, Daniel, then, in relation to that?
I really want to know why the houses aren't ready for people to move into. You know, they're social houses. These are not always, but a significant proportion of people that have no access to that financial means in order to get set up for the first time. The very least that should be done is the houses are painted and floored. That would alleviate substantially a huge amount of pressure on people.
I might have a solution for this.
I'll come to you in a second, Kelly, and I'm delighted that we'll be able to hear a solution.
It's been an ongoing issue for all the years I've been working in neighbourhoods and communities. I have to say, pre the opening of any new developments, I think it's early engagement, and I have engaged quite closely with a number of housing associations who have agreed, for instance, to paint the homes prior to any new tenants moving in. So it's about that early engagements, and I know the likes of the Sure Starts and ourselves and community organisations have done that with housing associations. So that's one aspect of it, and I think there is also a range of support locally within a range of organisations that can assist local people who do need the likes of white goods and do need that support. So it may be not as available within rural towns and cities, more in the urban areas, but it'd be useful to maybe ask what support that the department is aware of that is currently available through the range of initiatives and programmes that they currently provide.
And how that's being communicated so people know where and how to avail it.
And maybe write to the Federation of Housing Associations regarding all the housing associations. It is a concern. We're aware that some housing associations have, as a minimum, painted new homes before anyone moved in. Is that something that all housing associations do or would do?
Okay.
There'd be no harm.
Thank you, Kelly.
I was just going to say, I was in conversation with Seamus Leheny about funding and the Federation of Housing Associations and how it works and what the allocations that they're given and what that covers and what it doesn't cover and so on. And it's actually due to go out very shortly because I was going to approach some of you to co-sign this, but Seamus has offered with a couple of the financial directors from some of the housing associations to come on the 20th of February here to Parliament Buildings just for a round table discussion, an informal sort of get together with housing spokespeople to just give an outline and understanding of what funding they receive and what they can and can't do and what's included and what's not. So that could be covered in that, because if it's not in the is it the registration of housing associations, what the requirements are for a home?
Yeah.
You know, we can cover that, but I'll get the
It's
information.
hugely important area, and it is obviously an inequity and a potential for inequity. But I'm also conscious of the fact that earlier in the meeting we've flagged up the issue of the impact of NAC, and so it's complex in that sense too. So, but absolutely one that we should see. Can we get a bit more information on? And
one slight follow up as well. When we had the conversations from the Cliff Edge Coalition a number of times. The contingency grant from Universal Credit is not readily being offered or available. I have been on people's journals with them, and they have asked for the contingency grant. They're not offered it. They're told they're getting the advance payment. And I have yet to see very many people receive it, to be honest. There's a deliberate avoidance of giving that grant, and we need to get to the top of it, because if that grant actually was available in some of the cases I've just referred to, it would have alleviated the pressure on them, more so than an advance payment, because the advance payment is now repayable out of their immediate first payment of Universal Credit. So there's a major problem, and the department are not being open about what's going on with contingency grants. They're not offering them.
I think, yeah, absolutely. Let's get the breakdown, and also there was reference in the informal session around scripts. Let's consider, should that be in terms of our advisory role? Should that be included as part of? Is it included, and should it not be included? That facility exists for people that to look for.
Could we get a breakdown? You're asking for the breakdown, but the criteria as well, in relation to, so people are more informed and educated in relation to what's the difference and how you qualify for one or qualify for the other. Because that is alarming. That I think across most of us are saying that people aren't being offered it.
Or it's being offered, but there's such the feedback I got was that there's such a deluge of information when you do log into the journal that it's lost. It's not profiled highly. Right. So now I'm not saying it's done purposely at all, but it's just there is so much information whenever someone logs in. It can be very overwhelming. If it was profiled or included in that script, then absolutely. And then the other question was the one that I asked of Paddy, was that about that when people are given an advance loan, whether we can get that extended. And I think that's something that we should be lobbying DWP for, is to look at that 36-month repayment for an advance loan, because that would absolutely alleviate some of the pressure from people who are getting loans and having to pay them back in within 2 years.
Without necessarily being a huge overall cost.
Yeah, or exactly that's something that won't cost an awful lot to do, but if you were to extend it, and also then it kind of goes hand in hand with that minimum floor, that their benefits can never go below, regardless of how much of a repayment they owe the department. So there's a lot of changes that could be made relatively easy and without an awful lot of money being needed, but would absolutely help.
Okay, thank you, members. That's useful. Agenda item 15, members, date, time and location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 30th of January, here in room 29, here in Parliament Buildings. Thank you, members. The meeting is now adjourned, and we will take a minute or two to get broadcasting suspended.
Committee Room 29, Sound.